Disculpa. Funciona tot?
Crec que sí.
Zoom. Espera porque Zoom is setting up for YouTube. O sea, está completando. Done. Ok. Ahora sí.
Aquí.
Sí, esto
O sea
sí,
que-
al YouTube.
Ese
No, pero mueve.
es- Sí, la pantalla.
Y aquí pones muteado. Yo creo que ya está, yo no sé eso.
Vale. Espero que sí.
Y ahora no toquemos más.
No, no puedo hacer.
Sí. Vale, doncs bona tarda. I'm going to switch to English, and I'm sorry for the delay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this last seminar of the season 25-26, jointly organized by the Ethnomusicology Group, the Sound, Silence and Technology Research Group at the TecnoCampus UPF, and the Music Performance, Identity and Body Research Group at the SMOOC. I would like to begin by thanking the SMOOC for hosting this event, and of course for thanking the Dr. Emilia Barna for accepting our invitation to participate. And on this occasion, the session will be chaired by Dr. Marta García Quiñones, who is associate professor at the TecnoCampus. And thank you, Marta, for accepting our invitation to chair. Before that, I would like to begin by introducing very briefly the Ethnomusicology Group for those who are joining us for the first time. The Ethnomusicology Group is one of the working groups of the Catalan Institute for Anthropology. It was established in 2017 with the primary aim of offering spaces for debate, exchange, and discussion for those researchers interested in music in its broader sense. The coordinating team that currently are constituted by Dr. Isabel Llano Camacho, Dr. Josep Luis Lancina Murillo, and myself, Dr. Sara Revilla Gutiérrez, welcome proposals at any stage of research, and also from a very wide range of fields and disciplines like anthropology of music, sociology, cultural studies, popular music studies, ethnomusicology, musicology, of course. And we encourage both students and established researchers to send their proposals. Finally, I would like just make a few brief remarks about the format of the session. Our speaker, Emilia, will speak around 1 hour, and after which there will be time for questions, comments, and discussions. Those of you who are following the session via ICA's YouTube are welcome to post your questions and comments in the chat, and we will pass them on to Emilia. So without further delay, I would now like to hand over Marta García Quiñones. So thank you and good luck.
Hello to all of you here and the ones that are at home, attending at home. I'm very, very pleased to have Emilia Barna here today to talk about her new book, Working in Music on a Semi-perifèria, Local Music, Photo Production and Capitalism. We have known one another from the times when she was developing her PhD on the indie groups that were promoting their work on the internet. That was one of the first PhD thesis, I think, that was about his musical creativity on the internet. So she's a pioneer, and since you are, yes. And since those times,
that was MySpace time, so depends around MySpace.
Well, anyway. Yeah, but not very much people were doing this kind of stuff back then. And so I think that's to your credit. And since then, she has developing a brilliant career in music sociology and popular music studies. She's based at the Budapest University of Technology and Economics and Economy. And she's been there teaching at BA and I mean, almost like more than 15 years, I think, more or less. And she now is the head of the Communication and Media Studies MI program there. And she's also a member of the Working Group Public Sociology LSAT. And I'm very pleased that she's here to present her new book published last year. One that you can also download online. I think this is a very, very good thing to be able to access that on the website of the Central European University Press, and it's an imprint of the Amsterdam University Press. So we have also sent the link, and you will find it also in the comments of to this streaming. So I'm very pleased to have you here. So welcome, and please, thank you.
Thank you so much for these words, Marta, and thank you so much, Sarah, both Sarah and Marta, for having me here. It's a great pleasure, and I'm grateful for everyone attending and watching online. So yes, the talk will mostly be based on the book. I might sometimes make some comments based on research that I've done since, or things that have been happening since, to music and labor in music in Hungary. So as the title suggests, of course, in the book and in the research leading up to the writing of the book, I view I center on the work of partly musicians, but also all of the less visible background workers of music, primarily the music industry, even though that can, and I also problematize what the music industry is and what is outside of that. So this also includes, besides musicians, managers, promoters, technicians, teachers, journalists, but of course some of these roles, or many of these roles, are also overlapping, because as we will see, musicians tend in this context, in the Hungarian context, tend not to earn most of their income, make most of their living from music, or at least the music that they enjoy making. So this happens to be overlaps between the roles as well. And in terms of genre, genre, style, and also, as we will see, the musical labor process, I was aiming at covering quite a broad range, but I was looking at in this research at more or less professional music making, even though the boundaries of professional and amateur music making are also most of the time very much shifting and problematic to draw. But my criteria was basically to look at musicians and people working with musicians for whom music was at least making some money, so it was a source of income as well as pleasure. And it covered pop, rock. This was sort of the biggest field that I covered. Jazz musicians, electronic music, hip hop, film music to an extent, advertising music as well, so more applied, which was again a complementary source of income for some musicians, wedding musicians. So these were the genre worlds, and it was qualitative research, interviews, and actually the book is primarily based on interviews, and some of these are semi-structured interviews. Some of them are more focused time use interviews that I developed with the aim of gaining a more detailed, getting more data on the actual details of what these people do in their daily lives, but also so these were really informative. Basically, I asked musicians and the music industry workers about one working day in as much detail as they remembered the previous day. I think it's really informative in terms of lifestyle, in terms of I don't know, housing and so social relations, personal contacts, and so forth. So not just time use. And there was also focus groups and sociodrama that we did with colleagues of mine, but these are led. So the book centers more on the interview data. And roughly following the structure of the book, the main themes I would say are creative autonomy, which is always a central, seems to be a central question of any creative labor, and the structural network of dependencies, and theorizing this and working with the concept of autonomy. Secondly, the household, the role of the household as a social, as an economic unit, as also a space, musical labor, informality as in informal labor, and allocation of resources and division of labor, partly within, but also outside of the household. And gender relations, which are very much intertwined with these. And lastly, digitalization, which is of course in itself a huge topic as well, and the ways in which digitalization, together with all of the other factors as well, are impacting the musical labor process. And so I'm planning to talk a little bit about each of these, and then when we get to questions, I ask more about the topics that interest you more. So first of all, creative autonomy and the web of dependencies as a fundamental dilemma of creative cultural labor, often in studies around music as well, and musical labor. The main way, the primary way in which this is phrased is the creativity versus commerce dilemma, or so there are other ways of framing it as well. But so what's interesting is that so in Western-centric accounts, critical accounts, autonomy, creative autonomy, freedom tends to be viewed as something that is opposite the logics of the market, the capitalist logic of the market, versus in Eastern European accounts, in connection with the state socialist legacy, of course, but there is an easily understood state control on the opportunities, incomes, and everything else of creative workers. Creative autonomy tends to be formulated as autonomy in relation to the state. But of course, we have to, I mean, it was important for me to always view market logics and the state, and of course, the ways in which the state relates to or controls market logics as well. When we talk about autonomy, and some China-based studies of not only music but creative labor have been really informative in capturing this day. So the ones I'm referring to in the book, for instance, Zhao Lin's Be Creative for the State, creative workers in Chinese state-owned cultural enterprises formulate a similar critique against Western-centric analyses that don't really take the state into account, and they talk about, so instead of the usual art-commerce relation, they talk about an art-commerce-politics relation, and this was something that I kept in mind. but also concepts from popular music studies or music and cultural studies, such as Jason Toynbee's institutional autonomy and not this similar Mark Banks's negotiated autonomy, which talk about creative autonomy as a fundamental element in the cultural industry that has to be maintained in order for profit to be made. So there's even in the Toynbee's analysis is based on the like the major label part of the recording industry, and so even in the most corporate environment of the music industries, there always has to be creativity built into the system in order for new cultural products to be continue to be produced. So these have also been useful, or I view them as useful. So throughout the book, I was trying to take into account the global capitalist market, because it is a globalized digital platformized and so forth market, the state, the nation state, the political field, and working conditions. What are these working conditions like? And this is just some very general characteristics, and perhaps none of them will be very surprising, but there's very high inequality. So what you see is that there's a small elite who are actually able to make a living based on their musical activities or royalties, and the struggling majority balancing various jobs and income sources, whether from within the music industry or outside. There is an overarching encompassing everything, competition for resources. Networking was very obviously the most, so personal networks were very obviously the most important resource that basically everyone I talked to named. So there's these micro level dependencies, who you have to know, who you have to be on good terms with, that basically determine everything. What's the overarching narrative? A dominant individual logic of success. So via the star system kind of logic, not in all segments equally, but definitely the pop rock, like the dominant pop rock the genre is individualized in this sense. The well-known the passion and self-exploitation dynamic. Of course, it is the passionate nature of the word that makes you self-exploit. Structure and force of gender relations, and I highlight gender relations because I concentrated on analyzing gender relations, but of course, social class equally and racialized equally, just gender that I focused on the most, and there is a huge going back to inequality, Budapest versus the rest of the country, as in other fields as well as, of course, not only the music industry, but there was a clear that basically in most genres or segments, and anybody who wanted to achieve something would eventually have to move to Budapest and have to be acquainted with people there. Okay. So we're talking about the Orban regime, which now is happy to be able to add that to 2026. Yeah, so it, of course, when the book was published, it was still an ongoing thing, and nobody knew whether it would ever end. But the self-titled system of national cooperation, which has been a lengthy period of right-wing hegemony building, in which the increasing incorporation, taking positions, organizations taking control, and increasing ideological control in terms of nationalist and so forth, populist ideology in the realm of culture, and popular music was no exception to that. So it became an increasingly important field for the hegemonic former hegemonic power, so two things that I just wanted to quickly highlight here. So it might be a little bit difficult without going into much detail, but for a relatively brief period, the public, the MR2 radio, MR2, the public service popular music radio station, which became the popular music focused public service radio station after rebranding in 2007, was up until the mid 2010s a very important source of popularization and income for at least some alternative music as well, musicians, and then this changed with a complete. It wasn't just one step, but a complete transformation of public service media, a complete capture, but also downsizing. There was a mass downsizing, but people. So for the majority of musicians, this opportunity to be featured on national radio was lost, and there was definitely a nostalgia for this golden age of MR2. It's strongly present even 5, 6, 7 years later. And what the Orban government did in 2014 is to initiate a program for the funding of popular music through the National Cultural Fund, which many musicians at the time when I spoke to them, so between 2018 and 2021, were really happy that this program existed, because it signified to them a recognition, a symbolic recognition in a cultural hierarchy where popular music was not necessarily, in their experience, recognized as a legitimate cultural area. So at least now there were opportunities, theoretically, for musicians, material opportunities, so money for producing videos, organizing tours, music export, and so on. It signified and it led a certain level of professionalization. But on the one hand, it meant a really fragile dependence, because it was always dependent on political decisions. I mean, even the existence of the program, but also the running of the program, and it basically, after the creation of the program, it immediately made not only independents but record labels dependent on these grants. However, the allocation of the grants, and we know this. I mean, it was evident when I did my research, but now we have learned that maybe it was even or much worse than we imagined. That the allocation of the grants was really selective. There were certain favored artists and so forth. And during the time of COVID, And I'll just briefly allude to this, and then if there are questions, we can go into more detail. But at a time of really intense material precarity, first of all, there was no support of cultural workers at all, and then there were programs designed for ostensibly for the supporting of artists, but they were used for very obviously for political campaign reasons and for allocating resources to certain companies close to the government. Yeah, so it is certainly so very much dependent on politics and the precarious situation. And I just want to mention that live music, because live music was and still is the most important form of income, or to many musicians the only form of an income whatsoever. Music promoters, especially promoters associated with the bigger music festivals and venues, they seem to have the greatest power, and they were also very much politically aligned, so embedded in having good connections with the then governing party, and so they controlled kind of the whole, as musicians viewed it and narrated it, a whole network of managers who were on good terms with certain promoters. So these webs of dependencies. So music gatekeepers, so music promoters had a very strong gatekeeping and mediating role in this system. And so how can we characterize the dominant the dominant attitudes of musicians? Well, certainly at the time, what I found as the most characteristic was something that I termed a strategic or pragmatic apoliticism. They would say that it's best not to take sides, because I don't want to lose any part of my audience. Sometimes, or actually, so it's quite strong. So there was a reference to a particular notion of cultural autonomy, where you don't want your job is to be an artist, and your job isn't to have an opinion about social or political issues. And in general, and this was also evident from the focus groups, that there was a kind of an inward orientation of the musician society, with reference to a special lifestyle. You know, we don't, our work regime is not like the rest of societies. We work at weekends, we go on tour, and so forth. So we are special, and it was very interesting that that during COVID, when there was a lot of criticism on social media from non-musicians about musicians complaining about not getting any support, basically non-musicians telling musicians to go and get a real job now, finally. This resonated really strongly with musicians at the time, but when they spoke about this, they never made any reference to anybody in the rest of society having similar problems. So that kind of this lack of solidarity, or lack of the invisibility of society, basically, was something that I found characteristic, and a very, very pragmatic view of funding opportunities and resources. So they were very much aware that it, or applied apoliticism as a conscious strategy. Yeah, there was a more visible politicization actually after I finished writing the book leading up to the election, which we can talk about if you're interested. But yeah, this was certainly what I found. Digitalization was, of course, self-management via musical and social media platforms kind of caused digital entrepreneurialism was something that was very much present, but what I wanted to highlight here is that it also appeared as a route towards independence from that informal web of dependencies, for instance, a dependence on the mentioned gatekeepers, promoters. So instead of what in the context of the UK, Joe Hayes and Lee Marshall call or refer to as musicians being reluctant entrepreneurs, often there was a kind of a techno-optimistic discourse around a belief in digital media, in offering a kind of a morally clean alternative, so building your own audience online without having to rely on all of these corrupt gatekeepers. And of course, it's also it's very much embedded in the moral geopolitics as well, where everything that's connected to digital self-management is kind of the way forward, because that's how they do it in the West as well, and it's kind of a sign of progression as well. Okay. Political action. It was interesting to see that during the pandemic crisis situation, there was some temporary politicization. There was a new union chapter formed representing self-employed musicians, but for reasons that are a lot of the time typical. It was basically one committed person, and then everybody else expecting things to happen. It didn't last, and there were some other initiatives as well. So it was temporary, and what I saw was again based on this notion of being kind of a special species. So this particular notion of artistic autonomy, that we are special and we are not like the rest of society. There was also a lack of solidarity, and here's solidarity would mean actual, thinking and acting together with workers in similarly precarious positions, but perhaps non-creative workers or even creative workers in fields. But where I did find solidarity was within through small units of the band and the broader team, and where there was a broader team, there was a lot of care and within those small units, but not broadly. Okay, so the next topic, not unrelated to placement digital entrepreneurship, is the household, informality, and gender relations through these main themes. And so I already mentioned that when I say the household, I'm referring to the household as an economic, as a social unit, not just or not necessarily the family. And it's interesting that in the case of musicians, sometimes with workmates, fellow musicians, but they where so these kind of households where income was pooled, or at least the division of labor could be observed. And I'm trying to view or rely on work that use the household and informal production in and around the household. And this is not just reproductive labor, not just housework, but it can also be productive trade work around or in the house. So, for instance, as the family enterprise in a historical perspective, and you definitely see. Of course, in the title, you have this term semi-periphery. So, one of the specificities of the global semi-periphery, including Eastern European countries, is the greater weight of all of this informal production as opposed to wage labor being dominant or solely wage labor. So relying on, for instance, Wilma Dunaway's world system analysis-based and feminist or Marxist feminist based work, I found this notion of labor portfolio, organizing the labor portfolio, or as Mona Stevens-Smith defined income pooling. So the household is a unit that organizes various forms of income and manages them. Through this, households have historically played a fundamental role in managing major crises as well. And in the history or recent history of Hungary, you can observe this after the 1988-1990 regime change, and there is mass levels of deindustrialization, privatization, and job losses, and it is families, that households that have to somehow cushion all of these losses, and you see this after 2008, and I was able to observe this during and after the pandemic as well. So it is the household and mostly the invisible labor of women, of housewives within the household, who effectively manage these crises. And another thing in relation to this is the history of small entrepreneurship, even before the regime change, so during the state socialist period, the so-called second economy, which is partly agricultural labor, partly small-scale industrial or craft labor, or even services, hairdressing, or language teaching. It could be basically anything informally organized within the household that then is continued in the 1990s, and so again, similarly to Dunaway's description, we see descriptions of this kind of entrepreneurship as part of a complex household jigsaw used to construct a livelihood in a rapidly changing economic environment. So to me, reading about this kind of economic activity looked really familiar, having a lot of similarities with the ways in which music careers were also supported from within the household. And I will get to that, but just one more addition, and this is not representative data by any means, but it was interesting for me to observe. This wasn't something that I anticipated, but how many of mostly the musicians mentioned. So the first thing that I asked them was what their family background was, so what their parents did for a living, and quite a few of them said that they were entrepreneurs in the 1990s or early 2000s. So there was a similarity in some of these narratives, so as Daniel Bieber in a piece on informal economic activities in Hungary compared with Poland. They describe informality as a social heritage that may be grasped in long durée, so where knowledge and practice is handed down from generation to generation. Maybe there's something of that we see here. So I'll just quickly read these out. A normal family background. My mom's an entrepreneur. My dad's is also an entrepreneur. They were both entrepreneurs. My dad partly still is. Back then in the 80s, my mom's business was a souvenir shop that did really well and a toy shop. And my dad managed a carpentry and glazing business. We used to have a small shop. My dad and my mom were both in commerce. That was a small family business. But then many years ago, it had to close because we lived in the outskirts of the city. And so when the multinational companies arrived, that was it for the family business. So this is getting towards the 2004, Hungary joining the EU, and this shift. Basically, we were an entrepreneur family for quite a few decades. My grandmother's family had a shop on the pedestrian street of a small town that's a holiday destination. And when after the regime, Austrians, Germans, etc., were mildly well off, they didn't go to the West on holiday, but rather here to the East. They bought all kinds of shit they didn't need. We'll take a look at this country and we can spend our money. We opened a souvenir shop in the pedestrian streets in this town, which is the most popular place because they collections there, and the day resort closed. Then the shop went bankrupt, and we had to rent it out. Very similar to the previous quote, actually. I mean, similar story. My parents, and here in the last two, you also have a linking of certain entrepreneurial traits in their music entrepreneurship that they connect to their family background. My parents are entrepreneurs. For this reason, what I learned from a young age was that nothing happens if you don't make an effort. My mom is a real trouser-wearing woman, entrepreneur, real survivor. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting. But how did this income pooling and division of labor work in the case of music? What we can see is that the household very significantly contributes various forms of labor and resources to music careers. It's essentially the music economy, so to profit making and by other people, by other companies. You have material forms of contribution, housing, infrastructure, also energy, spaces to rehearse in, to transport. Very often a family member would act as chauffeur as well. And I'm not talking about beginner bands, but later on in their careers as well. Material support also means loans, so lending money, especially when there's a bigger project, such as recording an album or making a video. Creative labor as well. It would be very typical for female partners of male musicians to be creative partners as well. But of course, it has to be the male musician that gets all that is visible and the invisible labor. Besides the emotional labor, of course, once again, family members and close friends and support, and there are other types of productive and reproductive labor and resources. And again, this is where the time-use interviews are really useful. I was able to see all of these relations within the household, among friends as well. and so what we see is that reproductive labor, so care, productive labor, the actual creation of either the musical product or the promotional labor around the musical product and support and creative labor intersect in really intricate ways, and they are managed through these family relations or relations of friendship and relations of intimacy. So there's a lot of relational labor also that goes into this. And there are mechanisms of naturalization of female labor, especially. So of course it's the natural role of a wife or female partner to, for instance, to act as a manager of a male artist. But this is what always unpaid, an unpaid labor of love. Once again, we can go into more detail or see more examples, but so there are these mechanisms of naturalization taking place, and so as I mentioned, when there's in musical careers, there's in Hungary there's always a lack of resources. There are always and resources are always scarce, and there's always competition. But at the time of the pandemic showed things, of course, can get even harder, and then such a crisis situation will speed up the process of what Maria Mies has termed housewifeization, when the work of when the informal work of typically the housewife, it's a feminine role, but it is not only women that are victims to this process, but male musicians as well, for instance. So what this signifies is that unpaid and also naturalized labor will maintain musical careers to an ever increasing extent. Going back to naturalization, so the naturalization of female labor will be continuous outside of the household in the informal settings as well. For instance, this is, you will find this in the book as well, but there's a separate article that we wrote about this, how the role of the music manager has become feminized. So it's one area where women have been able to take on roles during recent years, and it's often cited as a good example, but it's not by accident. So it's partly because it is about taking care of musicians and managing like the housekeeping, but also because it has with digitalization and the shifts in power relations, music management has basically lost its prestige as well. So being able to do it. As one example of this housewifeization process, or as others have called it, the refamiliarization process. During COVID, I interviewed the female member of a musician couple who, up until the pandemic, had been performing very, very frequently, like often 20 times a month, so really frequent, a lot of gigs. And then when the gigging stopped, the husband was able to take a job in construction, and continued to do some music-related work, basically doing videos as part of sponsorship, and the female musician, took on all reproductive tasks. They had 3 children, so she had to take care of their online schooling. And previously, she also explained how they relied on a broader family network of mostly grandmothers and other mostly female members of the family looking after the children. She also did some writing, and she also managed the schedule of her husband. So she said, basically, I'm the secretary now as well. And this is how she spoke of this period. Now there's no time back for anything you cannot do, anything you cannot do in practice. Normally I'd have students, but I told them not to come until September because I can't even remember my own name at the moment. I can't concentrate. I never want to be in this period again. And if I have to continue, I'm familiar to some. I don't know how I will manage with the 3 kids because period for me is hell to live through this world. He is never here. I'm unable to call him as he's up to his neck in drive or or doing good work. And this was only the first. I mean, this interview was done actually in 2020, so it continued on for quite a while. And the last bit that I want to talk about a little bit, and it's again partly going to take to the household as well, but basically the emergence of a new labor process or labor regime. In the book, I use the concept of and framework of the labor process, but increasingly I've shifted to using labor regime as referring to the work of Elena Bagnoni, among others, because it more explicitly includes the household and social reproduction as well. So maybe it's a bit closer to my analysis as well. And this new digital musical labor processor regime is tied aesthetically to the very broadly understood hip hop music world, which does not only mean hip hop but also all kind of styles associated with basically a beat and then some rapping or singing. Whether it's trap or R&B or pop, much pop, what Steve Gamble calls hip-hopified pop, which can be produced using the laptop and basically, which is characterized by networks of collaboration as opposed to a rock band that's, kind of more traditional career of a rock band that sometimes stays together for decades with a regular team or regular technician. Here you have a lot of the time one producer who collaborates with various singers, rappers on a project basis, and this is very much attuned to or aligned with the platform logic as well. You have collaborations that you signify in the title of the song, this and this featuring that, and then these artist names basically work as tags on platforms, so they multiply the audience. They are good digital strategy, but it also means that even though we talk about creative collaborations, it also individualizes work to an extent, and it is very much also shifting towards a song economy. So it is less and less about producing albums, but rather releasing songs, most typically via YouTube in the Hungarian context, accompanied by videos, which I will return to, instead of a record label contract, but also instead of being completely independent. What's typical is that there are flexible arrangements with digital distributors who are, I think, very important and very understudied new intermediaries, at least in non-Western context, because once again, in the core countries, I think record labels. I think the record labels are still very much dominant players, but in Hungary you don't see this. Record labels have become management companies, and it is digital distributors who have partly taken on roles that used to belong to record labels. They are very important in channeling artists from various genres, but especially this broad genre world towards digital platforms. Yeah, so this is another characteristic. These are typically artists who do not rely on the mentioned state grants, partly because they're not viewed. So this music is lower in the cultural hierarchy. I think it's yeah, so the social status of many of these artists is also lower than the dominant pop rock world. Many of them are Roma artists or from lower social classes. Instead, they rely on corporate sponsorship, usually short-term project basis collaborations with clothing companies, soft drinks. Connection, competition, and platform governance. So all that we know about platformization, ranking, the number of views and likes, and how ranking influences visibility applies here, and it also complicates basically the nature of creative collaborations, because your collaborators are always your competitors as well, and some of the artists talk about how complicated this is. That okay, these are my friends, but I'm also very angry when I see that their video got more likes. Why? Yeah, and social media presence very much organizes the time regime as well. So these artists would say that my phone is constantly in my hand, and all of the time I'm thinking about what to post, how to post. So the boundaries between work and non-work and private life or and public social media content are basically non-existent. The informality of production music videos. I will finish with an example regarding this. But what's important here is that because YouTube is the main platform where music is released, it basically makes no sense to release music without visual accompaniment. So you constantly have to produce videos as well. So the production has to be cheap, and you have to be creative with using resources. Once again, relying on family, friends, people who will do work to you for free or very cheap. And here as well, there's a very strong gender division of labor and income. And just to illustrate this, I spoke to a few female trap pop singers, and one of them said that she never signed a contract because it looked so bad. And this other singer said that she had a contract, but it had no starting date. For instance, it was written in a really one-sided way. He, the owner producer, had all the rights and I had all the obligations, but I didn't really know how it was usually done. These artists are typically very, very young, who will sign with a producer who's also a record label owner. And what's important here is that the way this works is that there is somebody who owns the YouTube channel where the music is released, and it's usually these invariably male producer record label owners who own the channel as well, and all of the music is released via this channel, so there's no royalty income for anybody else. So you can get any royalty income, no nothing. And sometimes the live gig and receive the maximum of 40,000 forints, which is not a lot of money. But this was only one or two occasions. I remember how the video for one major hits, cost 150,000, and it was released via their channel, so all income is theirs. So looking back, I didn't even understand how could be so stupid. And she also talks about how her parents lent her money to make these videos, and also we're talking about people who always write their own lines, lyrics and melody as well. So they are authors as well, but in this setup, it's not usual for them to be credited for that. Okay, and so the last example, and allow me to read this description of a video, the shooting of video, which I was invited to, so I was able to attend this occasion, just to illustrate the kind of the shifting division of labor and the atmosphere of such an occasion. And I just put this quote here to indicate that according to the artist, you certainly have to have a video in order to release music, and this is where I will finish. The making of a video for an R&B track, I observed, illustrates a typical setup characterized by a relatively small crew and efficient use of available resources, a loose division of labor combined with improvisation and flexibility in terms of both themes and ideas, which are being shared freely across the team. At the end of the summer of 2020, before the second wave of COVID-19, when restrictions only affected large events, I attended a video shooting which took place at the location outside of Budapest, but within easy reach. The location was near natural water with some holiday and sports facilities, maybe I don't recognize it, but no, enabling various settings and backgrounds that could, with a little creativity, easily be made to look like a seaside resort of California vibe. It was revealed to me that this was a fairly common location for shooting music videos. The crew, consisting of 7 people, director, assistant, cameraman, operators, stylist, the female vocalist, and 2 more musicians who had collaborated on the track, which had just been finalized the previous night, running into early morning, as the main singer later told me, arrived at 5 p.m. for the official start. The shooting was scheduled until midnight. The first hour was spent with preparation, creating the hairstyle and makeup for the female vocalist, and the crew taking photos for various scenes and evaluating these. The second hour was spent shooting short scenes with the female vocalist. The male vocalist, co-producer and star of the production, did not arrive until around 7 p.m. when he walked onto the set, accompanied by his partner and their young child in a pram. The sense of informality, friendliness, and care permeated the event. As soon as he arrived, the male singer purchased his partner, me, and himself soft drinks. It was late summer and unexpectedly chilly towards the evening, so after a while, everyone was attempting to put cardigans and coats on everyone else. I was also helped out by the stylist who lent me a jumper. At one point, after I had completed the first half of an interview with the male singer, the director called me to show me the scene they had just recorded on the camera, a gesture that was less about needing my opinion and more about making sure I felt included. There was plenty of improvisation, partly in response to the changing lights and scenery, accompanied by a constant checking of the recordings, giving feedback, and everyone sharing ideas. At one point, I was asked to hold a small JBL speaker, which functioned as the source of the music close to the singers, while they were shooting what became the key scene of the video. There was also an increasing amount of alcohol consumed by some of the participants, facilitated by the male singer as the evening progressed. The friendliness and the informality were only partly due to the regularity of collaboration among the people that were present. Neither the female vocalist nor the 2 musicians had known anyone apart from each other. We had just met for the first time, but everyone was really nice, as the vocalist reflected later. The female singer also confirmed that other video shootings in which she participated tended to be similarly friendly. The professional work was also dispersed with plenty of intimate moments, especially during the first half when the mother and the baby were present. The baby had just received vaccines, and the 2 musicians helped the mother measure temperature. The video premiered in YouTube 16 16 days later, and it was an instant success, achieving exceptional numbers in terms of views and likes, and essentially making a name for the female vocalist. The example this demonstrates the efficient use of resources with an element of informality in the division of labor. Even though there were clear formal roles such as director, stylist, or musician, everyone participated in the creative process. Moreover, the boundaries between private and professional space and relations were blurred through the presence of family members, through emotional labor, care generally shared among the workers, and in part by substance alcohol use. And where I did to finish.
I don't know if I can answer questions because we'll do the first time. See if you can see our characters, so we're going to connect here so to see if someone has questions, but I mean, if nobody else wants to start, I may make a comment before it. I think that thank you very much for your full talk. I think that what you have chosen as an entry point, like of course, very well formal theory, but the interviews on the social drama as kind of groundwork for what you want. It's so interesting because it kind of gives you like a privileged view of some of the topics that you would expect maybe to be developed differently, like if you're about translation, but this is not only about the streaming, because for fans, especially the ones that you interviewed for the beginning of the book, ones Barbara, but also I guess also for hip-hop radio, it was very important. So when you kind of go and see studies about the term streaming, it seems like a streaming of everything, and there's nothing else.
No, yeah, the radio was still very much competing with YouTube, but still remaining the most popular media for across the population.
And when you would expect like your narrative of political resistance, which when for some years when they took a political stance, but you can only take a political stance to survive as an organization, otherwise there's no political stance to take. And so you see also very clearly in the book, I mean, these are strategies that they adopt in order to survive. And on the household aspect also, which is not so often found in studies, because many studies on the public activities, not how these are supported by other members of the household or other activities. So these are, I think, a very interesting entry point to a context that is local, but it can also speak to other semi-peripheries, like this semi-periphery as well, like the southern semi-periphery, where we also have a lot of people economy, and so I think this is really important. So I wanted to ask you, I mean, before of course the opportunity to other attendants here, how difficult or easy it was for you like to interview all these musicians? Like what was the most difficult part about that? Some of them are not very well known, some others, from how you described, are more or less popular, but you were not a member of the press interviewing them for the last album. So I didn't know if it was easy, even if, I mean, the bands that you interviewed at the beginning are more like part of again, or some kind of elite or cultural elite. So they might be more willing to, or they were more willing than the rest of was it easy?
Well, but no, there were lots of difficulties. This is exactly precisely in relation to these aspects. It was a lot easier for me, and also with a research assistant, a former student of ours who works in the music industry, and she has this great network. But it's one network. It was really helpful. Okay, first of all, it was evident that as in the music industry for interviews as well, it's good if you have a reference. So it was good to have her as an intermediary. It was easier to approach people than just by writing to them without having any connection. But it was so much easier to to get interviews with people, not necessarily just musicians, but there are also prominent promoters and managers who would regularly be invited to roundtable discussions who already have a voice. But of course, I wasn't only interested in those people, but it was much easier to, for people like that to say yes, because they are used to telling their stories. They have their opinions, they have the narratives, and then yes, the next difficulty is how to get beyond those existing rehearsed narratives. Initially, so there were quite a few interviews that two of us did. So these colleagues that I worked with, Agnes Blaschko, who was also responsible for organizing designing the socio-drama sessions, and Andrea Royko, who was responsible for the focus groups. So a lot of the time, initially in the pilot phase, it was two of us doing an interview, so we could pay attention to the question of the event. So that worked. But you really had to be conscious of the fact that these are narratives that you have to unpack. And then it was a lot more difficult to speak to people whose voices are not regularly heard, or whose opinions are not asked, who are, when they are represented in the media or the press, it's the tabloid press, and not prestigious industry roundtable discussions. I wanted to speak to a lot more of the hip hop, rap, R&B artists, and it was much more difficult to even get any kind of response from them. But that is something that I'm aiming to do in the future. So because there's still so much. I'm more interested in that world to understand than the much more publicly represented world of as you said, they are intellectuals, the elite of the, or not even just the elite of the pop rock world. How I said it. There were definitely difficulties.
Thank you. Are there any questions from you?
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I was just looking for, because I'm a bit familiar with the context. For that, but I mean, really great job. I'm really impressed. I know that it's a lot of work in that. And I just, one question, because when we talk about things from the perspective of our semi-peripheral context and, present a field which is like, linguistic peoples of most information that people know is that we have a fascist government, or we had in past tense, even it's hard to say. So, like this kind of cliche and
Let's wait.
Let's wait. I share this, absolutely. So let's wait. And there is this phenomenon, I think in Hungary, that there has been created groups like pop and alternative, let's call, or indie bands who are like this against the government, and they have like direct political messages. And I'm sure that you're familiar with the concept that I heard in some news discussions. It's called the hope industry.
Yeah.
And I'm just really curious of your opinion about of whether it could be understood, this kind of hope industry, as a specificity of this semi-peripheral and illiberal Hungarian context, and whether if things are turning good, which we are skeptical, then what happens with this hope industry? So I'm just really curious about where is the market when now it's, the vibes are positive. So I'm just really curious of how do you see this?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm a bit skeptical of the like. There's there are many, and there was this massive gig organized just before the elections, the so-called at the Hero Square, and I have to say I was genuinely surprised by the number of artists with songs very openly critical, very often very strongly critical of the government and many issues that I hadn't been aware of. At least from what I saw in my research, that these attitudes are still not necessarily the dominant, I don't know, sensibility of pop rock music in Hungary. With hip hop as well, you have some very strongly critical, very exciting artists, but most of it I think is very much individualized. Okay, even if there's like Beethoven, for instance, when there's an awareness of like social issues going on, but it's still how it affects me and this very individualized rapper voice that so lots of the time you have so I'm a bit skeptical of the whole industry concept itself. But if we, I mean, of course, there's evidence of this kind of sentiment that you are describing, that we are describing. Well, I think it will be quite exactly because I don't necessarily see it as dominant. It will be quite easy for it to be sold, and more inward-looking, intellectualizing ways of articulation to continue to dominate. And it has been an interest. I mean, I don't have an answer to the question of whether this is itself a characteristic semi-peripheral phenomenon or not. What I continue to be surprised by, and once again, this politicization during the period leading up to the elections among musicians was, I think, more of an exclusion or so it was an exceptionary period rather than the norm. So what I'm surprised by is the lack of political stance taken, and even during this short period, I think most of the politicization of these musicians essentially meant criticism of the Orban regime, which of course is understood the main issue, but absolutely no reflection on the position of musicians themselves, the precarity of their labor, the power relations within the very strong power relations within the field of popular music. And what I see is that after and maybe this is no longer answering your question, but something else, but after the regime changes, it's the same people, the same festival promoters who voice their opinions, saying, of course, how bad some of those decisions were, even though they were highly instrumental in implementing them. So there's also a lot of continuity in terms of the structure. But this probably wasn't part of what you were asking.
No, thank you so much.
Sorry, but Adam, the whole industry is a kind of theoretical approach. No, it's a media.
No, it's a media. It's not an academic concept. It was just the way that they self-described this kind of subsector, which was like very hyped for its criticism.
Okay, thank you.
But it's very catchy.
Yeah,
so like people started to
like all the media discourses.
Yeah, they're point being, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Since we are at the higher education institution, I want to ask you about, I mean, some of the traits that you have described about the music industry can very much apply here, like this strong individualization of people competing against one another. It's not that different from academia, by the way.
No, no.
So, but you know, I mean, it's, yeah, but people being constantly kind of pushed to become like enthusiastic entrepreneurs instead of reluctant entrepreneurs, and how this relates. I mean, at the point in the book, you talk about how, I mean, there is a professionalization process that involves creating MI programs and MBA programs, and then it's also happened here. But what do you think the higher education can do or should do in this context where students, they reasonably want to be players in that field, but and they expect to be taught how to play well, I mean, without challenging the rules of the game, but broadly, I mean, higher education institutions should be doing some kind of, I mean, critical approach to that, or maybe not, I don't know anymore. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I myself was teaching subjects such as digital music industries, where we are critical, but also, I mean, people come to study such a subject and participate in such a program because they want to work in that industry. Of course, we are as a program, we advertise ourselves to people that want to work in the cultural industries. So you're selling this dream as well, even if you're very critical. And actually, there's a nice reflection on this, like the difficulty or the ambivalence of this role in the book by Sally Ann Ross and George Mansgrave, Can Music Make You Sick? Where in the context of the UK, but they talk about the same phenomenon, that they of course, their industry is much bigger and training programs are so much professionalized and so forth. So it's in that sense an even bigger question, but they reflect on this really difficult position where they, no matter how critical they are during classes, they are still constantly producing or contributing to producing that workforce that goes into this industry. And we do as regards my own classes, we do talk about this with MA students and reflect on this, and they also tell me at the end of a course on the cultural industries, for instance, how disappointing some of this is when we talk about creative labor, precarity, but they especially on MA level, but also many of our BA students for material necessities, they work besides doing full-time programs. They already have a lot of experience, partly in the cultural industry as well. So they, a lot of the time, they very much understand what we are talking about based on the readings as well. But they also tell me, and this is, I think, the most that I can say at the moment, that it's better to be prepared and to be aware of these structures and mechanisms and the ways in which inequalities are being reproduced. And but we also talk about possible ways of, for instance, building economies of solidarity. We talk about unionization, and so there, I mean, you have to open up possibilities as well, is theoretically.
Yeah. Just I think one very curious aspect of unionization and informality, which is I think really East European. I mean, you cannot really, this is the definition of Eastern Europe in jazz. So now there is an official association of Hungarian jazz musicians, which kind of serves the proxy of a union. And now, after the change of, I mean, the elections, now there is a new organization of jazz musicians, which is a trade union. And both of them started to launch like a professional material to the government to what to do with jazz education, what to do with that. And now I'm just reading them parallelly, and it's like, really, so there are two parallel propositions from two organizations, one representing the old voice of the old informal, the embedded, and I know for informally, I know that there's a lot of corruption there for the way they spend public money. And now the new organization is trying to do something about that. But if you are a policymaker, you see that those jazz musicians, they can't even get to terms within themselves. So which policy recommendations shall I read for the musician? And now they kind of criticize each other. So there, so that's, I think it's a very typical story that it's a very niche thing, and we have two organizations really like.
I agree. It's very typical, and I could tell you stories about our own university union, like with the old guard and people, and never ending.
Yeah.
I have a question. Thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting. Linked to the previous question, but it's not in the same sense. I wonder how teaching is a way to have incomes of those musicians, because in your presentation you talk about different possibilities to get money, but I didn't see. I don't know.
Of income. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Not even just for musicians, but interest, and not only teaching, but something that I wasn't expecting to find, but a lot of musicians also enter coaching, the coaching business that they start sometimes. So in Hungary, it has become quite easy to gain a certificate, at least a basic level certificate that enables you to become a life coach. And then there's an increasing number of musicians starting advertising their services as a life coach for other musicians, but then they start branching out, and it's just, I started counting the number of times this get with a wedding musician, with a rock musician. They entered it with Payat, for example, who was one of the I think the first people to do this. But many people followed. So not just and sometimes they combine these things, that they would teach music production, and then they would teach the ways in which you can promote yourself online, and then also it becomes a kind of life coaching as well.
Wow. It's a new thing. I didn't know.
Yeah, it was new for me as well. But it also, I mean, it was so logical from the point or from the aspect that musicians do so much. I mean, part of the very complex emotional labor that being an artist entails. They work so much on themselves, and then many of them express how they are interested in psychology, and then they start studying something that is related to that, and they start working with others as well, because this is what they do in their work as well. So it is kind of logical, but I wasn't aware of this.
Cool. Yeah. Typical.
You talk about interviewing Roma people, and how was to deal with this, and how they explain their experiences. Did you learn about their ethnicities and how this intertwine with their vital experiences?
Not really, no. And it was basically one prominent producer, singer in the hip hop world, but partly because of the interview situation as well, because it was during this video shooting, it was a bit hectic, and he himself was a bit hectic, like paying attention to a lot of things at the same time. It wasn't an ideal interview situation in that sense. So certainly he had a narrative about how he was from a very poor background and no education whatsoever, but yeah, he decided to do something with his life and then pursue a music career. But no, that's research that I haven't done yet, but in jazz.
Okay, thank you.
But is wedding music dominated by harmonic people? Because you mentioned wedding music, that was one of the genres. Is it like some segment? It's a very ethnically.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that could be like, I was wondering when you were talking, is like Hungarian pop music, like, is it like, these are the Hungarian in it, like, is that aesthetics, or it is like more like an adaptation of Western musical trends or the global hegemonic industry, or we have our own voice in pop? I was curious in that, because I don't really know pop. I know the big names, and I think Azaria, for example, is a special.
It's an exception in many ways, I would say, but well, it's mostly following Anglo-American trends, but there are also examples where singer-songwriters would have a style based in French and so on, or is following other not non-Anglo-American pop trends. But yeah, the majority
some Balkan, some gypsy elements, some folk music elements.
Well, but there's language that makes it different. That really makes that different.
Yes, and well, language is interesting because there during the past 25 years now, I would say, or 20 years at least, there has been a gradual increasing Hungarian language pop music, but as opposed to, for instance, the early 2000s or late 1990s, it was of course Hungarian language pop, but the most commercial type of pop, and the most commercial type of rap. The rap music, of course, it has to be the local language. But rock bands, indie rock, in the hardcore scene, a lot of bands, or I would say probably the majority of bands, would be singing in English, at least the ones that got some publicity, and then it became partly linked to this cultural mission of the MR2 radio as well. I think more fashionable to sing in Hungarian, and it's interesting to see some bands whose initial albums were in English language switched to Hungarian, and that has continued to happen during the 2010s as well.
But these wasn't a factor in the grant system, the language.
In the
language, was it a factor to get a grant from the national grant program, and was impacted by the financial achievement?
Even if not explicitly, I would say, but it didn't start at that time. Started, I think, earlier with MR2 radio.
Which makes sense, right? Because very few Hungarian pop musicians made it abroad. Like very few, even if they're really cool. So it doesn't really. I don't see the point in singing in English when you have a language that everyone understands.
Nobody's going language. To sing in Hungarian if you want to.
It's
but the multiple.
I have a question regarding the working conditions of the people you interviewed, or maybe even your students. You're a teacher too. And I've been seeing, or I want to see, a bit of a movement in the younger generations working in the fields of culture, music, and creative works. sort of a refusal to the free work. Like after 2 decades of digitalization and platformization and everything, like now people are starting to realize that working for free is not an option to make it in the business or whatever. And I wanted to know if you have seen this a similar movement to this in your
I wouldn't say I have, even though I didn't put this question like this, but it's well, overall still very, very difficult to make any money from digital streaming in a country such as Hungary. So it is always, I mean, once again, same in every genre, but musicians have to seek live gigs, but there is certainly what I did see was the impression or the expectation from young musicians that they make an income through digital streaming as well, even if it never happened. And it's I think this is where intermediaries such as distributors play an important role, because they this is the service that they are selling. And certainly, I mean, there are examples of Zarya, although he's an exception in that sense as well, but there are other examples as well of young musicians making a lot of money in a short amount of time, partly through digital streaming. But these are still, I mean, even though so this number has been increasing, it's still a minority of artists that are able to do that, or whose teams are able to do this for them. But in terms of not accepting precarious conditions.
I wouldn't even say precarious condition, but just not working for free, even if it's a bit. Like if you refuse to work for free, you're still kind of showing an awareness of labor. Otherwise, you're just like enthusiastic and passionate. I mean,
well, because I wasn't maybe so the majority of the people I interviewed are between the late 20s or early 30s, and not the youngest generation, because I was interested more in the professional world and not young musicians just starting out, and that's partly why I don't have an answer to that. But based on the data that I have, I don't necessarily see this. There are some realizations, such as by this singer who realized that okay, this was a really bad deal.
I'm actually thinking about this, which I believe is a very little amount.
And the other singer of a similar age who was more conscious and refused to sign a contract. So she had already started releasing music under her own name, establishing herself as an artist to circumvent that, and the other singer talked about wanting to do this, wanting to learn music production skills through YouTube videos and starting making music under her own name, so controlling their revenue channels and so forth. So it's probable, but
in her, I can see a certain self-awareness of
You see a revolution.
but it's certainly I mean, there's a story behind it. those years. Yeah, that to her realization. It's a very good question, but I can generalize based on the data. Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. It's really interesting. There are a lot of issues here that we could talk about. I wanted to focus on the concept of the naturalization you talked about. And I think you talked mainly to women who considered it natural to handle with a household and also managing their husband's music profile. Or if I'm wrong, did those women consider it natural to do that, or was it natural by the community to do that? Did these women had also the chance to work? No, to manage their own musical profile if they wanted to, if they were musicians, and how did they handle with all that? How do they handle with nowadays after all this COVID era?
Yeah, so the answer to the first question is that it was not necessarily them, but others talking about the role of like, yeah, so whether it was during individual interviews with musicians or they were relying on them like support, but even the examples where we did 2 consecutive focus group sessions with members of a band, all male, and they and actually we also invited their manager who was female, but she couldn't come for either of those occasions, and basically the band listed everybody they worked with, the male technician, and I don't know the promoter they spoke with, but and they drew up this map of the people around them, and they forgot this one female, the manager, and they didn't talk about it, even though we were aware because we had been conducting conversations, but actually it was through the manager that we contacted the band, and we were aware of her complex role. And during the second occasion as well, when again the members of the band were also aware that we also invited the manager, they basically forgot to mention her when talking about the daily work and issues of the band. So just this invisibilization as well was really apparent at times. And then you read about the studies when again divisions of labor, but most of the data comes from female workers, professionals, whether as musicians or as technicians, managers, and so forth, sharing their to the time frustration about their labor being naturalized. So very often they were really conscious about these processes. Yes, there were cases where a female musician who would manage her own musical career and band would also at the same time manage the musical career of her husband. But so yeah, in particular cases, this meant they also had a career, but more typical was the setup, and there were actually people who, even female managers, who criticized the system, but then it turned out that they also managed that this particular person also informally managed her own husband's band, but she criticized other wives and girlfriends managing their husbands, boyfriends, band or musical careers with, because she criticized this from the perspective of lacking professionalism. But I'm just quoting this to illustrate that there was an awareness that this is a really typical setup. There would be an informal manager with the partner of the male artist. Thank you.
So maybe we can finish here because we have time. Yeah. Or
Officially, we have time, 10 minutes left. But
do you have
if
any
you want to,
energy left? Yeah.
We can volunteer.
I wanted to ask you about the follow-up of things like the prospects, like you mentioned, hip-hop, you mentioned like saying how things go after the election, I mean, with the new government. Do you have any particular genres that you haven't yet because you, again, that you haven't studied or
Yeah,
seen?
there are various potential areas where it would be interesting to do more research. What I have been focusing on and want to continue focusing on is all of these smaller intermediaries between platforms and musicians, such as distributors and people working either in Hungary or in the Eastern European region at offices who I think are quite instrumental in shaping the opportunities, or sometimes, I mean, not they lack the power to do so, but at least that's the service that they're sending to young artists. This also includes YouTube-based multi-channel network, MCNs, and other agencies who work typically with very young people. So that's something that I'm also interested in, because I had one particular interview that was very interesting with a music producer who works with artists in various genres, and he works with many young rappers, singers as well, and he was talking about how there is no safety net or network to support these really young people who, if they are able to achieve sudden success via streaming platforms, and I mean, it has occurred a number of times, then they have absolutely no idea what to do with the money, what to do with these opportunities, and there's various people who exploit them, and then they're thrown away. I mean, it's not an unfamiliar story from the history of the cultural industries. It's just something that is now taking place in new forms, and I mean that was something that struck me as well. So yeah, I want to look in more detail about this entire digital platform-based structure and labor and the various often unseen intermediaries who are locally, also partly geographically, reshaping the recorded music industry.
In order to exploit this concept of the semiperiphery, wouldn't it be interesting also to compare how this works in other semiperipheries, or actually?
Yeah, I mean,
studying one, you can make assumptions about what depends on that status and whatnot, but it's not that clear, and then maybe
absolutely, and this is part of my plan too, but especially since, for instance, the main transnational or multinational company distributor that is present in Hungary as well, I believe, used to be called Digital. They have it's got a Hungarian office, but they have the East Central European office, and other distributors have similar regional representation rather than country-based representation. So this will, taking these offices as a starting point, will also hopefully give me insight into other countries in the region as well, and regional networks.
Yeah, so
But-
we are not doing great.
But just one more example that I just basically designing my my next research project based on interesting things that I've heard in interviews. But in these, so these people working as and sometimes they are called A&R. So it's terminology taken from the record label era. Working for distributors, they do not only work with local artists. So there are people in Hungary who partly work with Hungarian artists, partly regional Romanian, Manana artists, Albanian rappers, for instance, but also I spoke to somebody who's actually also a former student of not our program, but our faculty. She also manages the YouTube accounts of India musicians from India, and she has this very specific knowledge of I don't know that particular scene. I don't know if it's a scene or genre.
Probably.
Yeah, and I think these are so there is some really interesting forms of knowledge transfer as well, in terms of geography as well, which I'm really interested in. I try to go deeper into issues.
Okay. So what do you think? Shall we wrap it up here?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
To let's move forward and posting this lecture. Sarah, for working 2 hours on technology and the organizers.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, Emilia. It was very interesting. See you on September. Have a nice summer. September, we start our season. Thank you very much for coming. There was no questions on YouTube, but some people follow the session.